All right, it being 7 o'clock this evening, I call to order the April meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. The first on our agenda is a call to order and a roll call. I note that Trustee Matter and Trustee Wells are present, and Trustee Heckendorf has excused. I look for a motion to approve the minutes of the Board and Budget and Finance Committee meeting of March 12th.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Guess that's it. I'd look for any comment or motion to approve the check register and treasurer's report.
I'll make a motion for approval of March 2024 check register and treasurer's report.
All right, and I will second that. Is there any further discussion or questions?
Nope.
All right, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that's carried. Item number 4 on our agenda is the wastewater treatment plant project. A request for payment in the amount of $323,933.23. And I look for a motion to approve that request.
I'll make a motion to recommend the board approve the 2024 wastewater treatment plan project clean water loan disbursement request number 1 in the amount of $323,903.23.
And I will second that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and that passes. Agenda number 5, the pay request number 6 on the Oaks of Jackson, amount in the amount of $32,341.03 to D.F. Tomasini, payment request number 6. And I will make a motion to approve and forward that to the village board for approval for payment request number 6 on the Oaks of Jackson, payable to D.F. Tomasini for $32,341.03.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Pay request number 5, agenda item number 6 on the agenda is for a pay request for the 2023 utility and street improvement project for Vinton Construction in the amount of $44,397.66.
I'll make a motion to recommend the village board approve pay request number 5, 2023 utility and street improvements for Vinton Construction in the amount of $44,397.66.
And I second that. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Item number 7 on the agenda is pay request number 8. The final pay request on the State Highway 60 utility upgrades project. A final pay request of $10,000 even to Advanced Construction. And I would make a motion to approve that payment request.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Carried. And then there's a recommendation, item number 8, for a cost for removal of the State Highway 60 Main Street streetlights, We Energies, in the amount of $51,904.44. I believe this is coming from Department of Public or Board of Public Works, right? With a recommendation to approve. And I would make a motion that we approve that request in the amount of $51,904.44 to We Energies for the removal of the Main Street, Highway 60 Main Street streetlights.
Second.
Any further conversation, any further input, feedback? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So item number 9 on our agenda is a request for a letter of credit reduction on the Maple Fields phase. This would be a request number 2. The information shows that they are requesting a reduction in letter of credit because of the sidewalks being substantially completed. And I would make a motion to approve the credit reduction on Maple Fields for Maple Fields project.
Second?
Any further questions? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. And item number 10 is discussion of the 2024 financing plan for the community center expansion project. And we have Ehlers with us tonight to give us some background. And Brian, it's your floor.
Thank you. Do I have to turn this on?
Yes, please.
Okay, better? Awesome. Thank you for having me tonight. I believe you have the packet materials, otherwise I can hand some out. Okay. So I'm going to go through our presentation here, but just to recap, what we'll be talking about is Ehlers was informed that the village did receive bids on the projects. So this was in the 2023 financial management plan, in a preliminary stage. And now that you've received numbers, village staff said it would be appropriate to kind of update that financing plan so that you could see impacts for financing this project. So we'll be looking at the debt service levy and tax rate impact, geodebt capacity impact, as well as just kind of big picture future financing plan, again, kind of keeping in line with that 2023 FMP and including not only isolated impact of the 2024 financing, but looking at future financings as well for the village. Again, that's kind of just keeping the same items from the FMP for the future stuff. So really no changes there, just kind of updating with the isolated impact for the 2024 potential borrowing. And then we're going to discuss possible use of cash, kind of, again, continuing that discussion from the 2023 financial management plan, and then establish and get an understanding for what the timeline would look like for the financing. So on the next slide, it's identified sources and uses. Basically saying if we have, this 5.9 million of project costs from the FMP, one of the outcomes was, we identified budgeting levy to the capital projects fund to use towards the 2024 borrowing, and that amount was $184,000. And so we do have that cash, reducing the borrowing requirement. In addition, as we talked about in the 2023 financial management plan, with TID 4 closing, there could be more cash coming in terms of where the capital projects fund balance will sit in the future. Therefore, you could apply more cash, and we'll talk about that later on. And then we provided what the estimated issuance expenses would be for all parties involved in the transaction to get your total amount financed, ultimately looking to finance about 5.85 million there based off of the project costs that we had at the time of preparing this. Any questions on kind of how the financing is sized? Again, we are, I think one update from the 2023 financial management plan of note is the financing vehicle that we would recommend. And at the time of completing, during your budget process, there was now a change in the law. So what we did show is an interim financing and then a 2024 GO bonds. The reason for that is municipal buildings were not bond eligible. That remains the same. However, there actually was a change in the law for GO notes, and now you're allowed to do GO notes up to 20 years. So effectively making bonds pretty much unusable, wherein notes just allow for kind of an easier financing mechanism where you don't have to have an interim, some additional cost of issuance and interest expenses, and then flip that, as quickly as possible. Now you can just go straight to the market. So just so you know, there's been kind of an update there. So we recommend GO notes for 20 years. So to first kind of talk about that, When we start to look at structuring this, obviously, we're looking to structure around existing debt so as to maintain as much of a level debt service tax levy as possible, while also trying to maintain attractive securities for the future investors in the debt, as well as consider, future capital or future capacity, for your 2025 and beyond borrowings as well. So we create gaps essentially in your capacity so that, at the time that you borrowed, then you would still have the ability to input new debt service as necessary. And we'll kind of show those results on the next slide, which is just kind of this chart that is on the left blue, on the right orange. On the left in the blue section, that is your current debt profile. So this would be kind of the net debt service levy that is based off of all debt that you already have existing, and then kind of goes chronologically top to bottom. So if you look at the third most column in the blue section, you can see where there are those gaps wherein you could fill in some debt service. For example, you have $226,000 of, additional capacity from 28 to 29, your existing debt profile, you have debt dropping off. So we can input some of the new debt service, increase the maturity in that year in order to have kind of equal debt service throughout. But again, we're also trying to fill in for future years as well and keep some of that capacity. So if you move to the orange section, just looking at the impact of only the 2024 borrow, adding that to your existing debt service levy, there are no other abatement sources for the debt repayments. Therefore, it would all go on the levy. The first interest payment would be about $300,000. So there's really no way to navigate that first levy impact hit unless we were looking at capitalizing interest or doing some other mechanical items in order to kind of get around that. Understand that if you are doing capitalized interest, that's going to increase the aggregate cost because then you're borrowing for that interest payment. So typically we do not recommend that, but we can look at those structures if the village is interested. So initial impact does kind of increase that debt service levy, and then we look to decrease that levy, throughout the remainder of the project, and you'll see we kind of keep some gaps there. So all in all, a little less, aggressive in terms of the payment schedule, but keeping in mind that you obviously at some point will have other projects, kind of like we talked about in the 2023 FMP, and you had a capital improvement plan, and keeping that capacity for those future projects in order to try to keep that debt service levy as level as possible. So overall then, moving or continuing right along this chart, we show what the difference in the taxes would be to a sample property value of $300,000. And ultimately, over the 20 years, this would cost $1,444 to a sample taxpayer. So again, that's 20 years of this debt service, the increase against your existing debt. So questions on that? I think this is obviously the most important part to analyze in any financing, regardless of the project, but just kind of make sure there's any clarity if necessary. Okay. So then on the next slide, we talk about the general obligation debt capacity. If you don't recall from the 2023 FMP process, you're limited to 5% of your total equalized value in terms of GO debt outstanding. So just looking at adding only this 2024 borrow, and we'll kind of show adding it all with future borrowings as well later, you're still under the 50%, which was our recommended limit when we went through that process last year. So to the 50% limit, which is the two rightmost columns, you still have an additional $6.7 million of capacity. Not that we're trying to reach that limit, but just to identify that we're still under it, of course. And then based on the amortization, you do, start to build back some of that capacity over time, and that's why you'll see the residual capacity increase as principal is amortized. The next slide, we kind of go beyond just to understand what would it look like with the future CIP as well. Given this is less pertinent to the project at hand, just understand that this is kind of reference material to more or less update the holistic picture for the future capital financing plan. We did, to remind you, we did have about $12 million for borrowing 2025 through 2030. Each time that you're introducing new money into your debt service profile, right, it's kind of harder to keep the level total debt service levy. So you'll note for the first couple of years that goes up as noted in the chart. However, we do maintain a pretty steady tax rate around $1.60. That's again based off of TID-out equalized value. And we would kind of continually update this, but we just wanted to provide it for context, just to see none of the new other projects are updated, only this project for your 2024 borrow. So then beyond that, to go back to the use of additional capital projects fund cash, TID2 is transferring 2.1 million, or excuse me, TID4, wow. TID4 is transferring 2.1 million to the capital projects fund in 2024. And so we did want to kind of run what it might look like if you were to downsize this debt issue by $500,000, and then you could just kind of incrementally understand, additional cash against the borrow and what that does. So if you were to add $500,000 in cash towards the project, meaning we're borrowing $500,000 less, that saves about $256,000 in interest costs over the life of the loan. It saves about $122, almost $123 to the taxpayer, to that sampled taxpayer over the life of the loan. It does not eliminate the structure issues that we talked about, meaning you'd still have a bump levy. One way to remove that bump in the levy and kind of do it another way would be to use the cash over time and apply that to the debt service levy as another abatement source, meaning that you're kind of applying that cash over time instead of against the borrow. So essentially, if you're looking at the previous slide, which is the whole, what it jumps each year, you would need $769,000 from 2025 through 2029, which in my mind, that says, well, we're getting 2.1 million and we'd only need 770,000 to kind of tackle the structure issues. We would have leftover, so we could apply cash to the borrow as well. So just note, again, you can kind of create both strategies in one as well. So we can talk about this as we progress. Again, this is kind of the preliminary financing plan. You would at minimum have a set sale resolution that would go before the board and then the sale award. So we would have, which we'll kind of get into the timeline here in a second. You'll have other time to kind of digest this and then move it forward based off of strategies you'd like to see. And then,
Brian, could I just ask a question?
Yeah.
So on this particular point, the 2.1 million would be coming from TID4. So if we were to take 500,000 out of that, it would be 1.6 million that would go toward TID7 then. If that's if that's what the board wanted to do, it would be 1.7 million that would go toward, or 1.7 million, 1.6 million that would go toward TID7, and the other 500,000 would go toward this project. Is that kind of the idea?
Well, so the 2.1 million doesn't have any, I don't know if you're connecting the 1.6 million to the affordable housing extension. Is that what, okay.
Yeah.
The affordable housing extension is actually not included in this. So the 2.1 is the transfer back. That was the liability held in the TID fund. So you're getting both 2.1 and 1.6, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But you could, you can do whatever you want with this 2.1. So if you wanted to apply, the one thing that I would identify there is you would create then a new liability similar to what TID 4 had to the capital projects fund. So it would be TID 7's responsibility to pay that back, whereas the money from the affordable housing extension is a permitted use for TID 7 under its project plan. So there's no liability there because that's explicit in the resolution that'll be for consideration tonight. So kind of two different things going on there.
If I could just add that that portion of funds that's coming back to capital from TID 4 also has relationship back to the advance that was made by the village to that TID. So it's segueing actually back into the capital projects fund, not a TID fund. Like Brian was stating, if the board redirected the money, it could become available. In our financial management plan, we have a variety of different projects that some of that money has been deployed or planned to be deployed to be a cash offset instead of seeking a note for some equipment that would have otherwise been eligible. So I won't say it's all spoken for by any means, but there is some of it that's deployed as cash in our plans for this year as it stands right now.
Okay, thank you.
So then the last item would be talking about the timeline before we get to, concluding this presentation. The timeline for the 2024 GEO notes right now, if it's decided to move forward, would be a set sale, meaning it's basically green lighting the financing mechanism and process to sell the notes. That would happen May 14th. We would need to kind of finalize, the amount not to exceed, and technically, now that these are notes, the resolution language now says approximately. Hence, the benefit of using notes is technically you can go up or down, which bonds you may remember or not, but those are not to exceed, so you can't go above. But generally, we want the project cost by then, so, again, if there's movement with the project and we need to move this back, we can, but just note right now, if the project were to move forward, Ellers, bond counsel would be ready to move forward May 14th for the set sale, which would green light the process in between then and then June 11th, which we would target as your sale date for the notes. We'd be preparing the offering document and doing the rating process, no different than your previous borrows. And then you could close in early July and receive funds for the project. In conclusion, given the project amount, kind of credit worthiness as it relates to your current general obligation rating outstanding with Moody's, recency and comfort level with open market competitive sales, we do recommend selling the notes in that manner for this project. And the eligible use of GEO notes kind of change in the law. Further use of cash, I think, should be explored and discussed. Additionally, either tonight or at future meetings, so we can kind of decide on a plan of attack. Again, it does not need to be decided tonight, but just kind of to say, I think we should explore several options, and we can present that to the board at a future meeting. And then if there is any action necessary, I just provided, the sample language if necessary in our presentation. But I'm not sure how you guys are handling this, so we just kind of present that as a standard now in case there's any confusion. So, any questions?
I do not have any. Tracy? So this is just for discussion, no action is required on our part, right?
We can defer to a follow-up conversation with the board unless the Budget and Finance Committee would like to opt into a specific series of ways we should address cash and bring forward a final version of something to look at. as soon as April 16th, but May 11th then would be the secondary opportunity for Budget Finance and Village Board to consider. I yield back to you.
So that would potentially be recommending to the village board from the Budget and Finance Committee, use of some of the TID 4 funds, right?
That's correct, and we can come forward on the 16th with what those impacts could be and sort of update some of these graphics if I'm not misspeaking, Brian.
That's correct.
So given your suggestion that you have in here, the recommendation or the additional potential that we would have would be to recommend an additional 500,000 from the transfer of the TID 4 to go toward this project to help reduce the overall cost and financing of the project. Is that kind of the sense that I'm getting?
The 500,000 was not explicit recommendation. It was more an identification of the buying power of applying cash. More or less what you do with the 2.1 million is ultimately, up to the village board. I would say there's merit to identifying maybe a mix between abating the levy to kind of keep that debt service levy the same. The other thing is, once you commit that to the borrow, it's gone. It leaves the capital projects fund, goes into that project. If we are applying it over time to the debt service fund, there is a benefit of additional interest expense. You'd of course get, interest from the borrowing as well during your spend down period. So if we're, truly crunching all the numbers, you could see there's a benefit to using it to abate the levy and kind of earn some interest along the way. And if you wanted to select an amount outside of the 184,000, which is non-TID related, going to downsize the debt, you could select an additional amount. And we're just, if you want us to present varying levels of that, I would just indicate as such. And we can come back with, the number of what would be left over in the capital projects fund from the 2023 financial management plan, and kind of find that truer dollar amount and say use the max amount and use 0, and we can kind of go from there.
So a recommendation coming from this board would be to consider using some of the funds, from the TID 4 payback, and request that Ellers then go back and make an assessment as to the impact of that and what a recommended amount might be. Is that what we're talking about?
Yep.
Second?
Okay, so I'll make that a motion that we, that we do what I said. Did you get that down? It was pretty enlightening, I think. And we have a second on that motion to recommend to the village board that we take a look at this issue and potentially use some of the funds from the TID 7 or TID 4 payback toward this project, and that we ask Ellers to make an analysis of how best to use that funding. And we have a second on that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Item number 11 on the agenda, Resolution 2407, accepting and rejecting bids for the 2024 Jackson Community Center expansion project. There was some information in the materials, the 24/7 recommendation. Anybody want to talk to this a little bit further?
Sure, what you have before you is a resolution, which is a vehicle to review the several bids that were noticed, both or opened February 20th, and I believe March 21st, thank you. Those bids were components to the Jackson Community Center expansion project, which aims to address deferred maintenance, security needs, and expanding footprint of specific spaces. This committee is being brought forward the resolution because you otherwise would have recommended approval or denial of bids for public projects, most recently the wastewater treatment plant project. What the committee is tasked with is, at this point, rendering a recommendation onto the village board for the resolution, which addresses both accepting and rejecting the recommended bids received by the village for the project.
So in the resolution, it was recommending rejection of some of the February bids and accepting some of the March bids. Okay.
One particular system that was bid twice was the roof for the facility, addressing it in two different ways. The initial bid that came through was ultimately higher than what was expected, and therefore a different system of a roof was included in the secondary bids, which is the recommended bid to accept. Beyond those specificities, I would have to yield to either our construction management company or Kelly. But that is the impetus of why there's certain acceptances and certain rejections recommended.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple of questions, but we should get the resolution on the book, or recommendation on the books first.
I'll make a motion to introduce resolution 2407, accepting and rejecting bids for the 2024 Jackson Community Center expansion project.
And I would second that. I do have a question, more specific to, I just see the playground equipment. There was no bids received, no action needed on that particular point. Was that intentionally left out, or we just didn't get any bids for it, or is that going to be coming up in a future recommendation, or what?
No, that's a good question. That was one area that we decided we could pull out of the project because the playground equipment we have right now, it's not your standard playground equipment like you'd see in Hickory Park or Jackson Park. It's more the purposeful play, lower ground equipment. And we have a few things now that we can certainly repurpose to use. And I think this is a great opportunity in the near future to have our friends come into play to help purchase that equipment. So I felt this was definitely one area where we could work separately. It wouldn't come back here. But I think we can get that done in a different way and save money for the village, so.
Okay, thank you. I did have another question on the two items that were deferred from the February bids to the March bids. Were the March bids on like the roof, and I think the other one was the aluminum storefront systems, is that right? Those two.
Correct.
So the bids that we're accepting now, were they substantially better than the bids that we got in February?
The HVAC, we changed the product a little bit, and it did come down about $60,000. It was still higher. Unfortunately, it's just what the market is calling for right now, which we found out over the past year that the prices have just increased. And then the storefront as well. We were hoping to be able to get a better price, and it did come down, but not by a lot. Jason, if there's,
So the first one was roofing, not HVAC.
Oh,
It
sorry.
came down about
Roofing.
$60,000 by changing that specification. And the aluminum storefront price came down, I believe, between $8,000 and $9,000.
yeah, sorry about that. Rough, not HVAC. That one was just high.
Okay, any other questions on the resolution? Tracy? No?
No.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that's carried. Resolution 24-06. I mentioned that this resolution was not in the packet of information that I saw, but it is in the village board meeting. So the 2406, I pulled it out of there for the affordable housing extension. So here we would be looking for, recommending to the village board that we use the funds from TID 4. Well, let me just read this resolution here because it's not in the minutes. So, resolve that the Village of Jackson hereby extends the life of TID 4 for 12 months from the date of this resolution to use the final year's increment collected in 2025 from the 2024 tax roll to benefit affordable housing. And be it further resolved, the Village of Jackson shall use the final increment to improve housing quality and affordability by providing funds to the Next Generation Housing Initiative in Tax Incremental District Number 7. This will provide housing as defined on Washington County's website, wherein housing is provided at no more than 30% of the household's gross monthly income. And I misspoke, this is just for extending the timeframe of the TID. It's not for use of any other funds. My bad on that. So I guess I'd look for a motion to approve Resolution 24-6 to extend the life of TID 4 and recommend that to the village board.
I recommend approval of Resolution 2406, Tax Incremental District Number 4, Affordable Housing Extension by Elders Financial Advisories to the village board.
And I'll second that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Review of proposals for the village banking services. There was some information in the packet on what's been done so far. Anybody want to speak to that issue? Darlene?
So every 4 years, we do an RFP for our depository and bank services. And I sent out 2 requests to Westbury Bank and to BMO. Westbury Bank is the only one that returned, and you have that information from them.
All right, so we would look for a motion then to recommend to village board that we approve the 2024 proposal for depository and bank services with Westbury Bank for another 4 years. I would make that a motion.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and item number 14, the proposals for the village IT services. There was information, background information in the agenda items. Anybody who's going to talk to that? Jen?
I'd be happy to. Before you all is a summary of the process that I took on along with Chief Oskell to review both our current services and see what another contract with our provider, Pros for Technology, would cost the village. Some of the cost changes that are proposed, or some takeaways of what's proposed and available for consideration tonight, include a contract term from 2024 to 2027 for cost increases that have mostly been affected by the number of devices that we have them monitor for us. There is some inclusion of additional security that we've been advised by not just them to take on, but other vendors that we met along the way in our process of receiving competitive quotes for information technology services. I wouldn't say that that's something I'm trying to push through tonight with you all, but my effective report out to you all is that we are within our auto renew period on our current contract. What we sought for proposals from 2 other vendors brought forward a vendor that didn't want to pursue any further because they felt we were well served, and the time that goes into inspecting your physical environment, auditing your existing payables. It is not simple to try and have someone look under the hood and evaluate if they want to beat out who's doing that right now, right? And so VC3 is the name of that vendor mentioned in the memo. They are happy to help if we ever needed them in the future. The second, our non-current and second provider that we discussed at length IT services with was Washington County. as this board is committee, and also the board is very familiar with, there's some extensions of shared services that the county is offering back to municipalities. In many ways, we've talked about a shared planner, we've talked about public works projects in the past. IT services is an endeavor they've taken on with at least 2 villages that I know of. There's one town that I can't remember the name of that's in transition now. But what effectively occurred was we didn't get anything back from them in time or prior to what is our auto renew period, 90 days prior to our contract. And our contract was up in June. So mathematically speaking, March 15th was sort of our determination time to try and beat. What I will say though, while we didn't get back a timely proposal from the county, I included it, so you guys can start to consider if you want staff to reconsider and bring back information at a time appropriate again to do so, we can. So this committee and the board later on will have to consider, well, do we stay in our auto renew 1-year period and reconsider at a later date, or do we say, we're actually more comfortable locking into a 2024 through 2027 contract. The unique opportunity right now is that sitting back and waiting a year, we can watch how the other communities are transitioned. The downfall, or what I don't think we're going to beat out, is that we're never gonna know for certain that these services are free. Right now, there is an amount that would be accounted for on a monthly invoice, similar to when we talked to the personnel committee today about planning services. They'll send us a monthly invoice. It would say how many hours they had worked, and then they'd present a credit at the bottom. And so they would offset each other, and our invoice would be for $0. So one component to the policy itself is that that's not a guaranteed into perpetuity. And if I'm advising this board on anything, I'm not transitioning every security system, door access system, desktop system, mobile device, and support to one entity 1 year, and then advocating for us completely pivoting again in 3 or 4. So I guess that's the one perk that could come about foregoing the county. However, when it comes to the amount of money, if the county had said, well, we're foregoing the credit process and now we're going to apply this cost to you fully, that cost is within $1,000 or $2 of what we currently pay our provider. And so we wouldn't be, shocked beyond belief financially. We'd be able to satisfy what those bills are at face value in this proposal. And I believe they've brought forward an estimate, because again, we haven't fully dived in, but about 79,000. And that's again within 1,000 or 2,000 of what our proposed 3-year contract would entail. The problem that we'll run into, and this is something we can take a year to try to resolve, is that this is not a 1-to-1 in terms of scope. The county would still pass through all of our licensing fees. We would be the ones paying Microsoft directly instead of pros doing it for us. We would have to license the municipal and other facility security camera programs. We would have to pay for management fees of other support staff of those systems. There's a little bit more of a hands-on management role we would take on, because the county hasn't sized nor will size at this time to take on the full scale or full menu of services we receive. And so the reason you see 2 potential motions before you today, and the board will consider later, is because waiting and seeing is not necessarily a problem. I just don't foresee solves if at some point the service is A, unreliable from the county, and B, if the county at some point charges for those services, which we don't have an inclination that's going to happen. But they are their own taxing jurisdiction, just like we are our own, and those conditions could change, right? And third, switching to them doesn't necessarily still provide us the scope of what we are served with Pros for Technology today. I've likely forgotten a couple things, Ryan, so you can tag in if you'd like, and if Randy and Tracy would be. We did that? Okay.
The biggest concern for me. Is on? Thank you. The biggest concern for me, and Jen talked about this, is that many of our systems that our current IT provider maintains for us, such as security cameras, door access controls, certain softwares, the county just can't support. And so we would have to seek contracts directly with those manufacturers. That's a whole lot more work for us. We've had Pros for Technology for many, many years in the village, longer than I've been here, and we're very happy with them. My recommendation or request would be that you approve the 3-year contract with Pros for Technology.
It was kind of looking to me too, like I mean, there's some statements in here that the funding for outside IT services from the county is still on a biennium basis, right? It's really not built in or locked in, so we could go with something 2 years with the county or a year with the county or something like that, and then find out that they defunded it in 2 years from now, and we'd be back to looking for another vendor, right? And establishing a relationship. Is that a fair statement?
I think we'd be looking for another vendor in the event that the costs they're then passing to us, and that kind of tags back to that 79,000 to us, if that's no longer competitive, which I would go as far as to say it may not be if that 79,000 virtually applies to their labor. It does not include those other costs that right now the pros number does. And for example, a Microsoft license, depending on the tier, is $15 to $30 per person. And I may even be incorrect, but it could be a month. Now that's not an insignificant cost when you add up the number of different tiered users we have throughout our employment base. That would take more of a deep dive because, again, we've already found ourselves in the auto renew space. I wanted to bring this just general conversation forward, and again, that's why you see 2 different options. I know that as policymakers, you're going to have to decide whether you want to do the wait and see and have staff revisit and spend time on that, or if we just commit to what we know is service that, if we were being charged by the county, is a comparable and or more competitive, I would argue, number to be paying for that service.
All right, I guess I would make a motion that we recommend the village board the Pros for Technology for the IT services for 24 to 27. I do like that option a little bit better, which then maybe gives the county an opportunity to see what they're going and where they're going in what direction, and maybe 3 years from now, they have a well-established system that we can tap into or something like that. So I guess I would make a recommendation that we approve the Pros for Technology for 24 to 27.
Second.
Any further questions or issues? No? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, that's passed. And item number 15, citizens or village staff to address the Budget and Finance Committee. Is there anybody signed in or, no?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion's been made to adjourn. I'll second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. And that's passed. Thank you.